Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another exciting lecture on world religions. For those of you who've been following this series, you realize that I talk about religions, both ancient, but with special emphasis on modern, so that we can sort of understand where we came from religiously, where we are today, and where we are going to be in the future. So the emphasis here is on how the Mormons give us an insight into a more recent world religion and how new religions emerge and what religions are going to await us in the future. So once again, this is Dr. Ronald Brown here in the middle of Queens in New York City. And I'm going to be giving you another exciting lecture. So, as usual, you can see I'm a college teacher, so here is the outline. Very complex, a bit more complex than usual, but the Mormons are a rather important religious movement and give us a lot of insights into the wonderful world of religions. First is going to be the historic situation, which determined a lot of Mormonism. Awash in a sea of faith, the early 1800s and the American Revolution period was a period of great religious ferment. And where does Joseph Smith, 1805, 1844, fit into all of this? How did he make sense of what was happening in America during the Revolution and the early Republic? Basic teachings of Mormonism, and why it is considered the most American of religions. It's not German Lutheranism, it's not English Anglicanism, it's not Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox, or it's not Jewish religion or Hinduism in India or Buddhism in Asia. It is a religion born in America. The role of Brigham Young taking over following the assassination of Joseph Smith, a summary of where the Mormons are today, and then how does this study of Mormonism influence our analysis of new religious movements, which seem in this day and age and the beginning of the 21st century and the third millennium. What do the Mormon teach us? What does the experience of the Mormons offer to enlighten us on the role of religion in modern society? So the basic theme with studying any religions is religions emerge or religions die if they either respond or fail to respond to new challenges. And so when you understand or want to understand any religion, whether it is Orthodox Judaism, whether it is modern women's movement influence on religion, or whether it is the rise of militant Buddhism in South Asia, each of these new religious movements, each of these movements respond to specific concrete challenges which existed at a certain time. And so you can't separate a religion, whether it's thousands of years old or whether it is emerging today. You can't separate them from the current challenge. For example, women's movement. Religions are grappling with religious implications of the rise of women. Now, if a religion responds well to a challenge, it will thrive. If a religion fails to respond to the challenge, it will linger and possibly even die out. I always tell my students that there are more religions in the garbage can of history than there are living today. Think of all those millions of people who worship the gods of the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Celts, the Vikings, Aztecs, Mayas, Incas. And where are they today? They were unable to respond to a certain challenge. They withered and they died. And now they are just some articles in encyclopedias of world religions. So it is challenge and response. Just as in the world of business, you don't respond to a particular challenge or a demand, well, then you go bankrupt. And religions can go bankrupt as well. So, what was the challenge that gave rise to the Mormon religion? Well, Mormonism, as the very first slide said, is the most American of all religions. It emerged in America. It reinterpreted traditional Christianity and Judaism, adapted them to the rise of a new nation. Now, when the Puritans, under people like John Winthrop, arrived from England and settled in New England, Plymouth Colony, we all know that, the Mayflower, well, they were more than just farmers seeking land or a religious group seeking a refuge from persecution in England. They arrived in America and recognized it as a new beginning, a new Garden of Eden, where they could create not just a perfect puritanical society up in New England, but as John Winthrop, one of the early governors, said, a city and a civilization which would be a light to the world. And John Winthrop quoted Matthew 5:14 when he called the Plymouth Colony a city on a hilltop to enlighten the world. And so from the very beginning, the Puritans were convinced that this was not just another little English colony like in South Africa or Australia or Canada, but it was of significance that the new colony would be a perfect society, lead to the regeneration of Christianity in the world, and somewhere down the road, even make conditions right for the second coming of Jesus. So the Puritans really viewed the rise of this new American civilization as of millennial significance. Now, painters such as Thomas Cole picked up on this theme in the 1830s, and here we see Thomas Cole's Garden of Eden when he was painting his predictions about the rise of America as a new civilization, the ingathering of exiles from the world, recreating humanity. John O'Sullivan, a journalist from New York, coined the term manifest destiny. And we see John Gast's painting below of America traversing the plains, railroads and stagecoaches and migrants and farmers behind her, driving out the Indians and the buffalo as the American settlers carry out God's destiny for the new nation to expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So here again, this notion of something serious happening in America, a new creation of humanity that would quite possibly eventually usher in the second coming of Jesus and the millennium. Well, such creative thinking, insightful thinking, maybe hopeful thinking or wishful thinking inspired many people, not just painters and not just historians and not just journalists, but people like Jonathan Edwards during the First Great Awakening, which swept the United States in the decades leading up to the American Revolution. Jonathan Edwards said, America is a unique country. It is a unique destiny. And his famous book, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, called on Americans to shake off their sinful ways, turned to God because great things were happening in these 13 colonies. And Jonathan Edwards didn't sit in his church and wait for the people to come to him. He went out and from tree stumps and from milk crates and from yards and from parks and even out in the forest, held his revivals, calling upon people to give up their sinful ways, to ease the anger of God, and to accept their destiny of greatness. The American Revolution fit into this pattern because we not only gained independence from Britain, overthrew King George III's rule in the 13 colonies, but many people said that it was time to become spiritually independent. We were no longer German Lutherans settling in America. We were Americans. Reinterpret Lutheranism or even reject it outright. Scottish Presbyterians, English Episcopalians, Reformed Christians from Holland and Germany, even the Roman Catholics started saying something is happening in America. Maybe it's time to get rid of this Pope in distant Rome appointing bishops and running the church. Maybe it's time to become American Christians. English Puritans, Baptists, and Methodists started questioning their inherited religions. Moravians from Germany, Amish from Germany and Holland, and Jews from Spain and Holland and Israel started questioning, what is this American experiment about? It is more than political. It is also deeply religious. The Second Great Awakening, 1790, following the American Revolution up into the 1840s, produced a plethora of new religious movements, reflecting the new identity of Americans as distinct from Europe, rejecting European influence, and creating a religious experience which responded to the challenges of a new nation. Groups which we recognize, such as the Seventh-day Movement, Seventh-day Adventists, Seventh-day Baptists, Unitarians, Universalists were successful. Christian Scientists emerged under Mary Baker Eddy up in Boston. Spiritualists, Rappites, Owenites, Fruitlands, Oneida Community emerged, proposed solutions to the crises of the day. Some flourished, such as the Adventist, Unitarian, Universalist, Christian Scientists. Others withered away. Millerites, as we're going to talk about in a minute, emerged with a very millenarian approach that the end of the world was approaching. Disciples of Christ we still have with us today. Chautauqua movement, restorationists, primitivists, and Shakers flourished and faded away. African Americans established a unique African approach to religion with African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church and Abyssinian Baptist Church. So a lot was happening in the early republic. We talk about writing the Constitution and Declaration of Independence and all of these things, but more was happening than political change. The Declaration of Independence is infused with religion, that our rights were not just given to us by the king or by some ruler, but God gave us our human rights. The revolution was not just politically expedient and justified, but it was in harmony with nature's God, the laws of nature, that we were endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights, and the King of England and no one else had the right to take them away. In justifying their revolution and independence, we were appealing to the supreme judge of the world, no earthly judge, but God Himself. And the framers of the Declaration of Independence committed their destiny to the protection of divine providence. So the American Revolution was justified in religious as well as political terms. Great General Washington offering his prayers in the left. The bottom, we see the rotunda of the Capitol building, which portrays George Washington among the saints and the prophets up in heaven. On the right, we see a very popular painting and picture of the time showing George Washington himself being taken up into heaven, bathed in the sunlight of heaven, being carried by angels up into heaven. Now, we might say this looks sort of ridiculous today, but this is how many people viewed the monumental events of the founding of America, our Declaration of Independence, victory in the American Revolution, and the creation of a new republic. It was more than a political gesture. It was filled with religious significance. Catherine Lee Bates wrote her famous poem, America the Beautiful, one of the national hymns. And she said, yes, we were filled with grain and mountains and everything that we could possibly want. But these were blessings given to us by God. God shed his grace on thee, O America the Beautiful. We were truly one nation under God. Well, America, both before the Revolution in the First Great Awakening and following the American Revolution in the Second Great Awakening, was described by one historian as a nation awash in a sea of faith. Individuals like Charles Grandison Finney, a Presbyterian preacher, charismatic, fierce, but convinced that America needed saving, that the souls must be salvaged, and that great things were awaiting America. And he went on the preaching circuit, setting up stages in villages, going off into the woods for outdoor revival meetings, preaching in parks, writing on the American revival of religion. That America was part of God's plan for human history and divine salvation. Following independence, millions of Irish Catholics flocked into the country. Millions of Germans came, settled the American land. My mother's family came over in the great German immigration just following the American Revolution. Scotch-Irish started coming in and settling across the country. The first Jews, the Sephardic Jews of the colonial period, were followed by German Jews following independence. Even more European religions were coming over. New people, whether they were Irish Catholics or German Catholics or Lutherans or Jews or Scotch-Irish, they realized they were in a new land. This was the land of freedom. And they too became convinced that this was more than just another country. It had a religious significance. So the religious diversity in the early years of the American Republic increased. We had the traditional Puritans of New England, the Baptists in Rhode Island. New York had every religion under the sun. New Jersey, predominantly Presbyterian from Scotland. Pennsylvania had English Quakers and the German Amish and Mennonites. Maryland, English Catholics and Anglicans. In the South, predominantly Anglicans, but in North Carolina, a good number of German Moravians, as well as large numbers of slaves, bringing their religions from Africa. The independent United States in the beginning went from the Atlantic to the Mississippi, and this area was being rapidly filled by new immigrants. Well, one person, William Miller, in 1843, was so impressed with this diversity of religion, the immigrants coming into the country, overcoming the religious warfare of Europe, persecution of Europe. He predicted that in 1843, a great event would happen. Jesus would appear in the sky above the United States, welcoming all the people into heaven, and the end of the world would happen. So, this great mixing of religions, searching for a unique form of American religions, gave rise to messianic expectation that the end of the world was approaching, that America was so unique that Jesus would choose the United States as the setting for his second coming. Well, the Millerites, as they were called, gathered together in upstate New York in 1843, giving away everything they had and preparing to greet the returning Messiah. Well, needless to say, it didn't happen. William Miller rescheduled it because of a error he believed he made. Once again, it didn't happen. But the Millerites and this messianic expectation gradually emerged into a new religious movement, which today we call the Seventh-day Adventists. Once again, the Advent is just around the corner. We see bumper stickers. Are you ready to meet your Lord and Savior? The time is drawing nigh for the return of Jesus, the Messiah. So this messianic expectation really permeated many of the new religious movements that emerged in the United States in the early years of the Republic. The Shakers, once again, a religion which largely has disappeared except for certain Shaker villages and their history and furniture. But their real name was the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Coming. Now, nobody knows that that's their actual name. We call them Shakers because, as you can see from the picture on the right, when they went into their ecstatic dancing, their religious ritual of dancing in circles, the whole building shook. And the Shakers said, we must tremble, we must shake at the very mention of the name Jesus. So other groups started realizing that messianic age was approaching. In 1848, John Humphrey Noyes gathered his followers together, went up to Oneida in upstate New York, and built the buildings which we see in the pictures on the screen. These buildings still stand. He gathered his followers. He developed a unique form of religious freedom and claimed that human perfection was possible here on earth. He preached the equality of all men and women. Once again, women on the frontier of America, an expanding country, had to know how to ride horses, how to shoot a gun, how to plow the fields, how to handle a team of oxen pulling a plow. And so women were given a very important place in this new rising religious ferment, something which wasn't happening in Europe, where the aristocracy and the king still ruled the country with an iron fist. But American freedom was a very different story. Well, in 1805, a tiny baby was born named Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith was very much a product of his age. 1805, the revolution was barely over, the Constitution was barely written, and the country was starting to attract huge numbers of Irish Catholics and German Catholics, Lutherans and Jews. The country was expanding. Louisiana purchased, bought the whole Mississippi Valley into the new country, which was being rapidly filled with new immigrants. Well, in upstate New York, which was called the burnt over district because so many new religious movements either were founded in upstate New York or like the Oneida community, became the refuge for new religious movements. So Joseph Smith was very much a product of his age. Well, he was, even as a teenager, very religious, but he was troubled. He said, my God, on every street corner, there's a preacher preaching some new religion. On every street corner, there's a church of some European denomination claiming to be the true church. So he started going off into a forest and praying and asking God to tell him which is the true religion. Well, at approximately 1820, he was in the woods and he had a vision where God the Father and God the Son and God the Holy Spirit appeared to him, and they answered his prayer. He writes, I was answered that I am to join none of them, for they are all wrong. And the personages went on saying, all of their creeds are abominations in the sight of God. Those professors, the teachers, the theologians are all corrupt. They teach doctrines, commandments of man, having a form of godliness, but then they deny the power thereof. Well, can you imagine when a young teenager, barely 15 years old, was looking for the true religion and had an apparition and said, all the religions are wrong, all the preachers are corrupt, all of the houses of worship are abominations, all of the theologies are wrong. Well, it must have been quite a crisis for the young boy. Well, he continued to receive revelations. Well, he was instructed why all of these old religions of Europe and even the new ones were erroneous. They distorted Jesus's teachings. Jesus had a clear teaching according to the Mormon belief, but it was distorted by the apostles who went off, and Peter went to Rome and became more pagan Roman than the Romans, and Paul went to the Greek Empire and became more Greek pagan than he became Christian. Well, they all established priesthoods, but they were erroneous. Also, very importantly, Joseph Smith was informed that because of all of these false churches emerging, that God had ceased to reveal anymore, give any instructions or guidance to the church. God himself had given up on all of these churches. Basically, he said, to hell with them. They are all wrong. And so Joseph Smith started thinking, well, so what should I do? He was totally perplexed. Well, another revelation came that Joseph Smith was, by then, 17, 18-year-old kid, was to go to a certain mountain in upstate New York. And at a certain point, he was to dig into the mountains and he would find the answer to his problem. Well, he followed his advice, dug into the mountain in upstate New York, and lo and behold, discovered a pile of golden tablets written in an ancient dead language. And he was given a pair of special spectacles, glasses, that he could read and interpret these tablets. Well, of course, this was rather shocking, and he finally dug up the tablets and interpreted them. They had been written by Mormon and his son Moroni in the 400s of the Christian era, the Common Era. So this was a rather surprising revelation. Well, he translated them, and the translation became known as the Book of Mormon, the Mormon Bible. Well, according to Joseph Smith, as soon as he had completed the translation, the tablets themselves burst into flame and were destroyed. Well, the records contained in these tablets was really quite remarkable. It picked up where the Jewish Bible and the Christian Bible left off. And so the Book of Mormon is not a replacement for the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, or the Christian Bible, the New Testament, but it is the continuation. It describes the destruction of Solomon's temple in Israel in the year 586 BC, or before the Common Era, when the Babylonians carted off the intelligentsia of Solomon's empire and took them to Babylon. And to this point, this agrees with both the Jewish Bible and the Christian understanding of religious history. There were 12 tribes of Israel. The leaders of all 12 tribes were carted off to Babylon, and they were settled there in Babylon. And this, again, agrees with the Jewish Bible and Christian history. Well, an interesting aspect of the 12 tribes is that when the Persians defeated the Babylonian Empire and permitted the Jews to return to the land of Canaan or the land of Israel and rebuild their temple, there is a story that 10 tribes did not return, and nobody knows what happened to them. These are the famous lost 10 tribes of Israel. Well, some people argued that they intermarried with Babylonians, and that was the end of it. Other people say they migrated to Africa and became the Ethiopian Jews. Others say they wandered into China and disappeared. Some people say they settled in India, in the area of Mumbai and the coast of India. Others say they went to Central Asia, where they became the Bukharian Jews. Well, until today, the mystery of the lost 10 tribes of Israel continues to perplex people. What happened to these lost tribes? Well, if you need a break, you can take a break here. We're halfway through. You can press the pause and then continue when you come back. Well, the Book of Mormon here departs from the Jewish Bible and traditional Christian history, and it recounts that two big clans, the lost tribes of Lehi and Sirach, migrated from Babylon. They built giant ships in Babylon on the coast, and they sailed down the Persian Gulf. They went around India, through Malaysia and Indonesia, crossed the Pacific, and they arrived in the Americas. This is happening around the year 600 BC or before the Common Era. Well, these lost tribes, these lost Jews arrived in Central America. They divided into various groups, each with a memory of the time in Egypt, the time of Solomon's temple, and the exile. In the Yucatan, they became known as the Mayas and built their giant temples and buildings of stone and palaces. In South America, Peru, and Bolivia, they became the Incas, building the ruins of Machu Picchu, which we see in the picture. On the right, the Aztecs of Mexico were another branch of the lost tribes of Israel. And in fact, the Mormons point out that the Pyramid of the Sun, which we see in the picture on the right, is the exact same size at base as the Pyramid of Egypt. An interesting parallel, which is used by the Mormons to prove, as proof, or as evidence at least, that the Aztecs were in fact the lost tribes of Israel and attempted to preserve as much of their Jewish culture as they could, as they diversified and spread across the Americas. Well, the Book of Mormon continues that in the year 34 AD, following Jesus's crucifixion and resurrection, Jesus came to these lost tribes of Israel in the Americas and preached. And many of them converted to the new teachings of Jesus. And they began to become Christians. Well, as we saw earlier, Christianity also spread to Europe, but there it mingled with Greek and Roman and Russian and Celtic and Slavic cultures and became deformed into the abominations of the churches of Europe. But in America, the lost tribes of Israel, many of them accepted Jesus and became true followers of Jesus. They practiced the authentic Christianity. Well, the Nephites were the most loyal of the lost tribes to the teachings of Jesus. And the Book of Mormon describes how they were the authentic Christians with the true Christianity, not the perversions practiced in Europe and practiced by most of the Christians of his day, or even the residual Judaism practiced by the Jews of the Middle East and Europe, which were also distortions of authentic Judaism. Whereas Jesus was the fulfillment of the prophecies regarding the Jewish Messiah. So authentic Christianity took root among the lost tribes of Israel, which most people refer to as the Native Americans or the Indians. And it flourished especially among the group called the Nephites. Well, in the year 421, there was a great war between the Lamanites, who were considered an evil group of people among the lost tribes who rejected Jesus' teaching, and on the other side, the Nephites, who practiced the true, pure Christianity. Well, there was a great war, and the Nephites were all but destroyed by the evil Lamanites. Well, before the Nephites were defeated and exterminated, Moroni, the son of Mormon, the leader of the Nephites, wrote down the history of true Christianity, the true teachings of Jesus, the true rituals and practices of true Christianity. He wrote these down on golden tablets, dug a cave into the hill Cumorah in upstate New York, near Manchester, New York, and buried these books in the year 430. And they lay hidden until discovered by Joseph Smith. Well, the Hill Cumorah remains a Mormon holy place in upstate New York, as you can see from the Museum and Reception Center on the right. It is considered one of the sacred spots of Mormon history. Once again, this is the burnt over district, which has produced so many different religious movements, the Mormons being one of them. Well, when Joseph Smith was instructed to dig up the tablets, translate them into the Book of Mormon, and you can see from the subtitle, Another Testament of Jesus Christ. So this is does not replace the Christian Bible, but it is the continuation. Now, the church is commonly called the Mormons, but the correct name of the church, like with the Shakers, is very messianic. The true name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, very often abbreviated as LDS, meaning that with the rediscovery of authentic Christianity and its spread around the world, true Christianity would be restored, and once again, the Messianic age would be soon upon us. And so the Mormons plugged into several themes which make it the most American of religions. The end of the world is going to happen in America. The only true followers of Jesus were in America. It was in America that the true Book of Mormon was rediscovered, and out of America would flow a complete restoration of Christianity and the end of the world and the second coming of Messiah. And so here we see books like The Millenarian World of Early Mormonism. Well, Joseph Smith was murdered in Carthage, Illinois, where the Mormons were being persecuted and had fled to Illinois, murdered in 1844. And Brigham Young, after a short interval, was accepted as the leader of most of the Mormons, although the family of Joseph Smith was expelled. But here we see again a major event which is really central in every religion, and that is the passing of the charismatic leader and the rise of the new leader. Joseph Smith was charismatic. Brigham Young was an organizer. He's the one who took over, commanded the Mormons to migrate to the West, and eventually was given instructions to build a new Jerusalem on earth called Salt Lake City. Now, the Mormons plugged into many themes current at the time. Not only was America the promised land, not only was true Christianity being restored in America, but the American way of life, the American self-made man was very much a part of the religion. The famous hymn by Isaac Watts read, "Would he devote that sacred head for such a worm as I?" Christians stress the original sin, the original sinful nature of humans. Well, the Mormons, on the other hand, firmly believed that America was not a land of worms and people mired in original sin. The Oneida community said human perfection can be achieved here on earth. The American way of life, the pathway to earthly perfection, was part of the American dream. And think, all of the Irish fleeing English religious persecution and the potato famine, arriving in the United States and getting a horse, getting a house, becoming farmers, and becoming successful. So this was the self-made man, the man responsible for himself, the woman who could achieve perfection here on earth, was incorporated into the new Mormon religion. Now, another very important part of Mormonism was that with the restoration of true Christianity, Jesus and God were once again revealing messages to the Mormons, that God was no longer silent. God ordered the Mormons to move to Independence, Missouri, which for the Mormons was to be their new Garden of Eden. He revealed the restoration of polygamy. One man could have many wives. He revealed the doctrine of the baptism of the dead, that even a person who had long since died could be given the option of joining the Mormon church if one of his descendants converted and was baptized into the faith. Revelations to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young concerning the second coming of Jesus, and indicated it would take place in Independence, Missouri. Blacks were excluded from the priesthood, and that the institution of the church should remain among white people only. These were some of the doctrines which were revealed with the restoration of true Christianity. So God was no longer silent. God had taken clearly the destiny of America and the Mormon church in hand. The Mormons also reflected this new idea of human equality. There were no princes and kings ruling America. America was a land of equality. So the Mormons rejected the powerful bishops of the ruling churches in America, the Greek Orthodox patriarchs, the Catholic popes and bishops, and reflecting very much the teachings of Martin Luther in Germany during the early years of the Protestant Reformation, the Mormons believed that every person was a priest. There was no caste system ruling the church. And so every young man and later every young woman had the possibility of playing a major role in the church. And until today, it's not uncommon for a Mormon to receive a phone call Saturday night and say, so-and-so is sick, you can give the sermon and lead the service tomorrow. So it was again American equality, no aristocrats and popes and patriarchs and bishops ruling the church. Every young man, and today every young woman, is expected to become a missionary for at least 2 years. Once again, spreading the teaching of the new church. And we see the growth in the graph. By 1873, they had grown to 100,000, reaching 1 million by 1947, 2,063,000, up to 15 million in 2013. Many people saying it is now above 20 million. Once again, spreading with enthusiasm the new message of a restored Christianity. The Mormons also accepted a rather austere lifestyle, very much like the Puritans of New England. They incorporated the anti-alcohol movement of which is prevalent in the time. Any drug, not just alcohol, was forbidden, whether it's coffee or tea or cigarettes. Marriage was a key issue. Sex outside of marriage was forbidden, and many Mormons until today do not allow televisions and VCRs and video games. And so the emphasis is on being fruitful and multiplying. One of their interesting doctrines was proxy baptism. Here again, drawing on the teachings of Jesus in 1 Corinthians and the Gospel of John, that only those individuals who are duly baptized into the Mormon church can go to heaven. But if a person joins the church, they have the right, the authority to offer baptism to their deceased ancestors, giving them the chance to accept the true Christianity and gain access to heaven. Now, this proxy baptism was still practiced, although it is highly controversial, because many people say that if a Jewish woman becomes a Mormon and then starts baptizing her ancestors, who were rabbis and Orthodox Jews, into the Mormon church, this was an insult. And so it is downplayed now, but it is still part of the official teaching of the Mormon church. Tithing, a very important part of their church instructions, a Book of Mormon saying 1/10 of everything you possess must be paid to the church in tithes. Now, tithes is not charity. It is a religious tax that you must pay. So Mormons pay not only federal income tax, state income tax, city income tax, maybe county income tax, but they also pay church income tax. And beware, if you cheat on your Mormon taxes, you could be audited and expelled from the church or fined. Charity is giving a quarter to the guy playing the guitar in the subway or a beggar on the street. Tithes, like the Muslim zakat, is obligatory. Another controversial doctrine was plural marriage, which once again was revealed to Joseph Smith, that man could have many wives. Joseph Smith ended up marrying 33 women, produced 19 children. Brigham Young had 55 wives with 56 children. This was very controversial, but when the state of Utah requested inclusion as a state in the United States, they were forced to temporarily suspend polygamy in 1890. Although there are still many who continue to practice the right of polygamy. Now, when Mitt Romney was running for public office for president, I was asked to give talks at colleges and universities and libraries and churches and synagogues, basically describing who the Mormons were. I was considered a safe speaker because my MTS is from Harvard Divinity School in World Religions. I have a PhD in international politics and a BA and an MA in modern history. And so I can present a controversial religion in a sane and scholarly way. So everybody would ask me, do Mormons wear Mormon underwear? And the answer is they are required. Mitt Romney never directly answered the question as far as I know, but This is an example in the picture of the Mormon underwear, which is to preserve modesty. There are no bikini briefs and bras and panties. If you do wear them, they are covered by a very modest garment of the Mormon underwear to maintain modesty, to avoid sin and temptation. So when Mitt Romney was running for office, of course, with the American separation of church and state and this American super sensitivity about matters of religion, whether it's the Mormons running for president or the election of John F. K. or more recently Donald Trump's bringing of the evangelical Christians into the White House, religion and politics are usually not discussed together in the United States. But with the rise of Mitt Romney, it had to be discussed. Now, the Mormons make a clear distinction between a Mormon church, which are scattered all over. They're usually distinguished because they have a spire, but they do not have a cross on top of the spire. It'll be just a pointed sword going up into the sky. But a Mormon temple, which is a major church in a major city, will have the angel Moroni at the top blowing his trumpet. On May 8th, the Mormon Temple of New York City was finally completed. And from May to June in 2004, the temple was open to the public because it had not yet been consecrated. There were approximately 53,000 people who were included in the area that was serviced by this temple. So this faces Lincoln Center on Broadway. The lower floors are a church, library, reception center open to the public. The upper floors contain the temple, which is restricted to only those who are members in good standing. So I took a group of students and we visited the temple because it is a very rare occasion where there is a new temple being built nearby that my students and I could visit. Now, the Mormons are considered the perfect example of what scholars call a costly religion. A costly religion is a religion that makes great demands on you. You don't just sign a paper, give them a check, and join, and you're a member in good standing. Classical cheap religion is the Episcopal Church, where you show up maybe once a year and you list Episcopal on your papers if you want to, but you might not even know or remember the name of the pastor. Whereas a costly religion would be Orthodox Jews. Your clothing, your hairstyle, your hats, your beards, the food you eat, the celebration of the Sabbath, Friday night to Saturday, the plethora of Jewish holidays, praying in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, living in a ghetto, eating only kosher food, are great demands to place on you. So if you become an Orthodox Jew, then you are expected to conform to all of these rituals. Seventh-day Adventists are considered a costly religion. Religious Muslims, once again, what you eat, when you pray, how you pray, what you wear, all of these are severely regulated by the church, by the mosque. Now, I was raised Roman Catholic. Now, as a kid, we couldn't eat meat on Friday. During Lent, we had no music or candy. Anytime we wanted to go to the movie, we had to get the permission of the Catholic priest. Holidays, holy days of obligation were all part of it. The house was filled with holy water and statues and candles. That was a costly form of Christianity. With Vatican II, it changed and it became much easier. And many people say that Catholicism switched from a costly to a cheap or an easy religion. But the Mormons would link themselves with Orthodox Jews, religious Muslims, Seventh-day Adventists, and other demanding religions. Well, Brigham Young took over shortly after the assassination of Joseph Smith. He was the organizer. Look at that face, stern eyes. When he gave an order, you did it. When half of the Joseph Smith's family refused to accept him as the leader, he simply expelled them, and he was running the show. He was the St. Paul who organized the Christian religion after the disappearance of Jesus. Well, he was the one who supervised the move to the new promised land, Utah, Salt Lake City. And he was the one who organized the Mormon military units to protect them from hostile Indians and other Christians. And he's the one who claimed not only Utah, Arizona, and Nevada as their homeland, but all of Southern California, chunks of New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, even Oregon and Idaho as part of his new kingdom, which was named Deseret. And so he supervised from 1847 to 1877, a long tenure really organizing the Mormons into a church, sending out missionaries to Europe, all over the Americas, and launching the Mormon tiny group to a world status as a major world religion. Independence, Missouri was deserted as the Mormons moved to Salt Lake City, but once again, being geographically in the center of the city and of the country, it remained a sacred site, and you can see the temple on the right. Very dramatic architecture with the spire. And Mormons believe that it is to Independence, Missouri, that the returning Messiah, Jesus, will appear. Well, one of the missionaries that was sent out to convert and to spread the new message was Parley Parker Pratt. His goal was to convert New York City. So while the Mormons were being persecuted, they went on the offensive. Joseph Smith was in Washington and preaching. Parley Parker Pratt came to New York. Well, he was, like many of the early followers, a very charismatic person. And the Mormons claimed that he had powers directly received from God. He could raise the dead, heal the sick. He had the power to speak in tongues to all these immigrants flooding into the country. He could perform miracles, gave revelations. He even spoke with God, interacted with angels and spirits. But unfortunately, the crusty old New Yorkers had really no time for this new crazy man who claimed that he could heal the sick and raise the dead. And eventually, Pratt gave up on New York, but before he left the city, he wrote a pamphlet placing a curse on New York City that said God would destroy New York City because of its rejection of the new Mormon teaching. Well, the New York Mormons, when they responded to the call to leave the East and to migrate to the new Deseret Kingdom in the West, had no intention of buying a horse and a buggy and traveling overland the whole way to Salt Lake City. They were New Yorkers, after all. I mean, they were used to a certain luxury and considered themselves citizens or residents of the Empire City, and they were not about to swim across the Mississippi and fight off Indians to get the whole way to Salt Lake City. So they hired a boat, the USS Brooklyn, and in 1846, some 238 followers got on the ship. Well, these were New Yorkers, so they were professional people. One of them was a printer. Well, he not only got on the boat, but he took his printing press, paper, ink, and assistants and everything he needed to set up a printing press for books and newspapers once they got to Salt Lake City. A lawyer took his law lab, his law library. A doctor took his entire laboratory and nurses and equipment to set up a hospital in Salt Lake City. An architect took all of his plans and instruments for designing the buildings they would need. So they got on a boat. They left from the lower Manhattan, the port on the East River, where there's a plaque today commemorating the voyage of the USS Brooklyn, sailed the whole way around South America, up to the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii, for a quick toilet break, and then landed in San Francisco, rented wagons, went overland to the Deseret. Dramatic story of New York Mormons. And in fact, we see a picture at the bottom of the USS Brooklyn. This was, again, a direct reflection of what was going on in America at the time. The United States had bought Louisiana Purchase in 1803. But when the Mormons decided to go to Salt Lake City, as you can see from the map, just above Mexican secession, you see the Salt Lake. It was part of Mexico. So when Brigham Young took his followers across, they went across the border into Mexico and claimed it for the United States. So manifest destiny, the destiny of America, the divine destiny of America, was very much a part of the drive of America across the continent. I remember reading in the accounts of the USS Brooklyn saying how they fervently celebrated July 4th, Independence Day, to show that they were the most loyal of Americans. And they were incorporating the myth of America, greatness, its manifest destiny, into their theological world view. So they very much believed in America as an example to humanity. When they sent out missionaries to Mexico and South America and Europe, they were preaching American exceptionalism. And thousands of English and Scottish and Irish and German immigrants converted, joined in the mass exodus to Salt Lake City, building another city on a hilltop to be an inspiration to the world. So when Donald Trump adopted Make America Great Again, he was very much reflecting this vision that America was more than just another country, that it had a divine destiny. Well, the Mormons continued to grow. Their first president, Thomas Spencer Munson, was chosen president in 2008, continues to receive direct revelations on the guidance of the church. Well, the church has, because of its vicious and energetic missionary outreach, grown by leaps and bounds. Today, about half of the Mormons are now outside the United States, chiefly among Latin Americans, Argentina, Peru, Chile, Brazil, and Mexico. because the Native Americans there are the lost tribes of Israel, the prime target for conversion, but also growing churches in Africa, in Europe, even in Asia. In 1978, a direct revelation came from God to the then president that African Americans should be admitted to total participation in the church, that the curse of Ham in Genesis would be lifted, and that African Americans were once again a non-cursed people. Well, here again, this reflects very much the civil rights movement, where African Americans were joining the mainstream of American society. Mitt Romney, running for the presidency, as I mentioned earlier, brought the Mormons to the attention of the public. Who were they? What did they believe? Does he wear the magic underwear? Well, his book, No Apology, The Case for American Greatness, again combines the Mormon belief in the divine destiny of the United States with the American myth of American exceptionalism. The American Empire and the Commonwealth of God, once again blending church and state, religion and politics. Very much a centerpiece of both the American idea of exceptionalism, manifest destiny, a city on a hill, and the Mormon belief in the divine role of the United States in God's plan for salvation. And this myth of the United States as being a holy nation was and continues to remain part of the American identity. Whether it was President Eisenhower in the 1950s, putting the words "In God we trust" on our currency and "One nation under God" in our Pledge of Allegiance, organizing national prayer breakfasts to ask the Lord to guard and guide America, or whether it is more recently Donald Trump garnering the support of the evangelical Christians and the Mormons as the person who will remake America as a Christian country. Church membership continues to grow, and as the book on the right, The Rise of the Mormons, predicts, in the 21st century will be a golden age of the church. Many people note that today the population, 2021, has reached 20 million and continues to grow. Even in the city of New York, I see constantly Mormon missionaries 2 by 2 going around and preaching. I met 2 just a couple days ago, and one was from Peru and one was from Africa. Their mission assignment was New York City, where Americans are so used to sending missionaries abroad to convert the heathens. It is now the Africans and Latin American Mormon missionaries who are coming to New York to convert the American heathens. The vast majority of the Mormons are in South America and North America. Brazil, Argentina, Peru, certain countries in Central America have a Mormon majority. They're also growing in Japan, the Philippines, Southern Africa, Australia, Thailand, England, and Europe. In the United States, they remain largely concentrated in the West, in the areas beyond Salt Lake City. But as we noted earlier, as recently as 2004, there were enough in the New York City area to merit a temple. Now, analyzing and studying the history of the Mormons is more than just of historic interest. One of the big problems in studying world religions, and especially new religions, is people immediately get suspicious. When some guy walking around New York City declares himself or herself the Messiah, our first reaction is to lock the poor person up somewhere, delusional or taking drugs. But if it is a religion whose origins are lost in the mists of time, we tend to take it at face value. Hinduism's origins going back thousands of years ago into the Vedic period, well, that's so long ago, we accept it as probably true. We accept that Abraham and Moses probably existed. We accept that Buddha existed in long ago times, and we accept their teachings as having a certain historic validity. But when it comes to new religious movements, whether it's the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the founder of the Unification Movement, called by many the Moonies, we get suspicious. We say, wait a minute, in this day of age of the internet, of jumbo jets, of cable TV, we get a little bit more suspicious about some person today claiming to be the Messiah or claiming to found a new religion. In Brooklyn, it was Menachem Schneerson, the great rabbi who ended up accepting the title of the Messiah, the Jewish Orthodox Lubavitcher Messiah in Brooklyn. Well, even a lot of Jews considered him sort of off in left field, even though he never personally claimed to be the Mashiach or the Messiah, but he did not object to being hailed as such. But when a Messiah emerges thousands of years ago, we tend to say, well, it's ancient religion because it's old. But when today, whether it's the Menachem Schneerson in Brooklyn, or whether it is the famous Jesus of Washington Square in Lower Manhattan who claims to be Jesus reincarnated, we get a little bit more suspicious. In fact, the Jesus of Washington Square, as you can see in the picture, was a rather controversial figure, believed in communing with nature with no clothes on and preaching, claiming to be the Messiah. Well, below that, you see me during the pandemic. I mean, all kinds of religious events were happening in New York and the world during the pandemic, and that itself is a topic for another lecture on how the crisis of a global pandemic has spawned new religious movements. There's me with my mask on with the Jesus of Washington Square behind me. So we are suspicious of new religious movements. We use terms like cults, like sects, like marginal cults. Now, scholars refer to them as new religious movements without passing judgment. But people tend to be more accepting of ancient religions whose origins are lost in the ancient times. And when it comes to a new self-proclaimed Messiah, automatically write them off as being lunatics. So this is one of the major challenges of studying a world religion or a new religious movement, whether it's the Mormons, who as recently as the 1840s and 50s were causing controversy, or whether it is the Mashiach of Brooklyn, or Jewish Messiah, or the Jesus of Washington Square, we can become more suspicious. And New York is filled with new religious movements, and we are traditionally suspicious of them. Whether it's the voodoo priestess Mama Lola in Brooklyn, or whether it are the Jews for Jesus, the Scientology Church, the Nation of Islam, or the Rastafarians, automatically we tend to dismiss them Well, we should not be too quick to dismiss them because who knows? As these religions respond to the challenges of the times, they just might emerge as a great religious movement of the future, while other groups which today are building monumental houses of worship would fade away. Well, the Mormons have attracted attention. With Mitt Romney and the growth today, they became of concern. Whether it's the Broadway show, the Book of Mormon, Sister Wives on television, or HBO's Big Love, Mormons are once again attracting both positive and negative attention. But as we have seen, they did respond to a very powerful demand of the mid 1800s and continue today with their strong emphasis on pure lifestyle and on strong families and complete dedication to their church. They continue to respond to the demands of the United States and of the world and continue to grow. Now, who knows what is going to happen in the next decades, the next century, or even who knows what the religions of the third millennium will be. But still, we have to seriously view the new religious movements, the so-called sects and cults and crazies, who knows, just might establish a religion which will sweep the world, and Catholics and Lutherans and Buddhists and Hindus and Jews will also be relegated to the garbage can of religious history. So if you'd like to comment on this or give me questions or comments, feel free to contact me at ronbrownmedia@gmail.com. So it was wonderful having you here today, and I look forward to meeting you, seeing you, talking to you in the future on other topics of religious concern as we plunge into the 21st century and into the third millennium. So this is Dr. Ronald Brown logging off. Thank you for joining me. I shall see you in the future.